Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Talk It Out. I'm Jay Dow. This week we're diving right into a touchy subject that has affected millions of families across the country at one point or another, and that is teen pregnancy. There's an ongoing debate over the right approach. Last year, the Trump administration announced that it was going to cut budgetary funding on about $200 million for funding for teen pregnancy prevention programs. And that was recently blocked by a federal court. The Trump administration's response was to announce new funding guidelines that put abstinence education first. It's a very touchy subject, and we're going to get right into it. We want to know what that policy is going to look like on the streets. We have Sarah Searmuddy with us here today. She's with a nonprofit out of the Bronx, the Women's Health and Education Development Corporation.
Yeah, Women's Housing and Economic Development.
Housing, my apologies. You work with a really interesting sex education program that does not lead with abstinence education. You're actually working with high school students who are teaching middle school students in sex education.
That's correct.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so our program through WHEDco, it's part of our after-school program at one of the public schools in the South Bronx. And our program is called Just Ask Me, JAM for short. And so our peer educators, who are all teenagers in high school, are trained to do comprehensive sexuality education with middle schoolers. And so they get trained by me, and then I help supervise their time in the classroom.
That's pretty aggressive. A lot of people would think, wait a minute, you're teaching sex education, talking about contraception to 5th, 6th, 7th graders. Yeah. But that's the reality.
Yeah, so our program right now is working with 6th through 8th graders, and it's all age-appropriate information, developmentally appropriate information. We rely on the National Sexuality Education Standards that have been put out by a number of prominent leading organizations on the topic of sexuality education, and we use those guidelines to create a really comprehensive program that tries to reach teenagers and reach young people before they ever need to use the information, and so that they're well prepared to navigate those tricky situations.
You know, we've been taking in some really interesting comments, and I want to read some of them. James Winnistanley writes, "Look, if you make something forbidden, kids are going to try it in some way better than they know how to use contraceptives properly, instead of forcing the religious conservative idea of abstinence-only sex education." And then on the flip side, we have Roxanne Hicks Calet writing, "No one has the right to decide for anyone what sexual practices they should institute into their lives. No one. I say wait until you're married to have sex. Doing it that way honors God and lessens your chance of getting an STD. Being promiscuous makes a big mess out of your life. Be celibate until married. Less heartache." Sarah, is it that easy?
What we find is that it's not quite that easy for folks to remain abstinent until marriage. It's an incredibly hard method of birth control or contraception, which is what we promote it as in our program. It is an option for teenagers, just like condoms and birth control pills are an option. And but we find that it's a really hard method to practice. Teens are facing a lot of peer pressure. They're under the impression that all of their friends are having sex and engaging in it. And so we find that it's quite difficult, though not impossible, for people to practice that. And what we want to promote is allowing people who feel that way to pass on their values to their children at home, but so that they can still get that good factual information in school.
So I'm the father of 2 daughters. This is a personal subject for me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that parents out there, regardless of how old their children are, if they have daughters, if they have sons, this is a reality.
Yeah.
So what does the balance look like when you're giving the curriculum to high school students and having them navigate that balance between passing on information about abstinence, just saying no and waiting, and telling middle school students, you know, this is how you use a condom or other forms of contraception? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so we certainly present postponement and abstinence. Oftentimes we'll kind of frame it as postponement, with the acknowledging that abstinence is tied up in some moral language, whereas postponement acknowledges that it's just postponing something that, for the majority of people, is something they'll engage in at some point. And so we talk about that, and we really encourage young people, when they start saying the messages that they've received at home, if it's in contradiction to what we're saying, supporting and validating what they've heard at home, correcting any misinformation, and then encouraging them to go back and have a conversation with their parents about what the values are for them.
This is not just a gender issue. There are some racial and socioeconomic disparities, even in the CDC numbers, right? Teen birth rates for Black and Latino teen mothers almost twice as high as the national average for teen white mothers. So your nonprofit is based in the South Bronx, predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood.
Yes.
What does your program look like in terms of how you cater to that demographic?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we find is really successful about our program is the fact that it is peer education, and that they are getting information from teens who they might know from being in school with them a few years before, who might be friends of their older siblings, who they might just have seen or be neighbors with, and so they're much more confident in that the fact that the people who are teaching them information know what their experience is, and they can relate to them a little bit more. And we find that that's been an effective way to communicate this information. They see themselves in the peer leaders, so they take what they're saying as more fact, and our peer leaders more reflect the community that they're working in.
I want to read another comment from Kinmin Chang. Abstinence is definitely the way to go. For teen pregnancy, we all have a choice. We all have control of what to do or what not to do with our reproductive organs. Of course, when you made the wrong choice, there is a price to pay. Don't have kids until you are ready, especially financially ready to get married and make a family. And then on the other side of it, we have Jennifer Hernandez writing, contraception abstinence will not keep them from doing it, but will most likely result in an unplanned pregnancy and their lives ruined. They have to be taught the consequences and how to protect themselves. I'd rather put my kid on birth control than she become a mother before she's ready, or get protection for my son. I know a lot of people may not agree, but I'm being realistic. And that's something that we hear and see from a lot of parents, the reality of the situation out on the streets today. Are you hearing from your parents, from your students in your program, that they are having these discussions at home? And when is the right time to start having those discussions?
That's a great question, and I do end up talking to many parents about this issue because it is something that parents are concerned about. They want to give the information, but they want to do it at the right time. They don't want to do it too soon or too late. And so what we are seeing is that a good number of young people in our classes do come in with knowledge that they've clearly received from their family members. But what we're hearing that it's not necessarily based in conversation. They're not having any sort of conversation about sexual health. They're more picking up the messages that they hear around the house, or they have been told, don't have sex, or if you have sex, this is what will happen. And that's more of the conversation that they're hearing for the most part. But in terms of when is the right time to have a conversation, one of the things that I promote is that it doesn't have to be a one-time conversation or talk. It's something that can happen over time and through open communication with young people.
How do you open up that conversation?
I love to use TV and social media. So sitting down and watching a TV show with a young person, because there is bound to be some innuendo or some mention of sex in a TV program that a young person is watching. It's either a relationship or a conversation about sex, and then using that as an entry point, saying, hey, what did you think about what just happened? Were they using protection? Do you know anyone who are having these conversations?
I can remember when I was a kid, eons ago, prime time was still kid friendly, and the really adult stuff didn't come on until 10 o'clock. But now, with the advent of Netflix and all of these streaming services, kids are watching content that may not be age appropriate for them at any time during the day.
Yeah.
Is that something, how affected are these kids by what they're seeing on their phones?
So affected. We're finding that they're certainly being exposed to more information at a younger age.
Right.
I have these conversations with 7th graders who are horrified by what 3rd graders know, and even as an 11-year-old themselves.
So there are elementary school students who are in the know already.
Yes, absolutely. One prominent sex educator says that anything that we teach young people about sex after age of 6 is remedial, and that knowing about sex in the sense of reproduction and biology is completely age appropriate for a 6-year-old.
I want to read what April Marie Rosardi just wrote. Abstinence doesn't work. Give them support, the right information they need. Teen pregnancy isn't going away. That said, the rates in the Bronx have gone down.
Yes, so we have seen the rates in the Bronx and all across the country. Our teen pregnancy rates are dropping. They've dropped a lot in the past 10 years, which is really fantastic. Mm-hmm. What we know is the reason that this dropped, and it's because teens are using contraception more and consistently. The age at which teens are first engaging in sexual intercourse has not changed. It's still hanging right around 17, 18 years old, and that really hasn't changed in the past decade or even 2. And so the difference is entirely that they have information about contraception and birth control, and they're utilizing it.
Let's just say that fast forward a year, and the Trump administration gets its way, and your program all of a sudden is forced to lead with abstinence first. What would that look like?
So it would focus a lot more on refusal skills, and it would entirely cut out the part of our curriculum that talks about contraception or anything else. And I think what we would see is teen pregnancy rates rise again. We can't expect that just because they've gone down that they'll stay down if we're not doing anything to keep it that way. What we know is that comprehensive sexuality education works, and that providing information about their options is what's best. Teens, as many folks have said, teens want to make their own decisions. They find themselves to be invincible, and they want to be adults. And the things that we can do as educators is give them the tools to make them feel like they're making those decisions for themselves. And if we tell them how to lead the healthiest life possible, they're most likely going to make the decisions that are going to keep them healthy.
Are teens asking you what's the right age to have sex?
All the time, pretty much every class I have.
What do you tell them?
I tell them, one of the things that I tell them is the age of consent in New York. But then I follow up with talking about questions that a person could ask themselves to know that they're ready. So one of those is, do I feel comfortable being naked in front of my partner, or having my partner see me naked? Most of the time, that one alone makes everyone in the room shrivel up, and the idea of being naked in front of someone else is really terrifying for an 8th grader.
Right.
And so, but then also, do I know what I would do if I were to become pregnant, or if my partner were to become pregnant? Do I know what I would do if I got an STI? Am I okay with how I would feel if other people found out that I had engaged in sex, or if this relationship ended the next day? And not telling teens what they have to do, but giving them the tools to kind of make those decisions themselves. And I throw that right on a handout that has how to use a condom properly. It's the questions about how to decide if somebody's ready to have sex.
And what's the reaction that you've been getting to that?
They really want to know how to use it. They know that it's something they may need in their life, and they want to know how to. That's one of the pieces of the curriculum that they're most interested in and most in tune with, is condom use.
And just to circle back to make sure that for the people who are just now jumping in, your program involves high schoolers, grades 9 to 12. Mm-hmm. You arm them with the curriculum, mm-hmm. and then they are going out and providing sex education courses and curriculum to middle schoolers.
Yes.
And that's now the accepted age of giving students arming them with the right sex education.
Yeah, and we're not doing condom demonstrations or even pulling out condoms at all for 6th graders. Right. We do a condom demonstration for the 7th graders, and then in 8th grade we have them go through the steps themselves. So that, because we know that if teenagers have had a chance to touch and look at a condom, they're more likely to use it. It's self-efficacy. If they've never seen a condom before, they might not want to. They'll feel embarrassed to pull one out for the first time when they're in the heat of the moment, and so they're not going to do it. So that's why we expose 8th graders to condoms.
Sarah Sirmani, Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate your experience and everything you had to offer. Great information for parents and for teens. This is an important issue. You should really be paying attention to what's happening in Washington. The Trump administration is making a lot of decisions that are going to impact programs all across the country, not just here in New York, and obviously an ever important issue for parents. That's going to do it for us this week for another edition of Talk It Out. I'm Jay Dow. Follow me on Facebook, Jay Dow Journalist. Set up your alerts for PIX 11 to know when we're going live. And we'll see you next Thursday at 1:30 p.m. for Talk It Out. Take care.